Yali Madid, everyone, welcome. My name is Iman. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're delighted that so many of you here with us from many parts of the world. I am the chair of the Women's Activities Portfolio in the UK, WAP. WAP are dedicated to supporting women and their families throughout their lives. And we've recently launched this virtual Sisterhood Forum for women to come together as one Jamat to support and uplift each other and make meaningful connections. We really hope you will enjoy this session, which we want to be very informal and interactive. We would love to hear your thoughts on the chat throughout the session and in the breakout, which we will have later on. So as you may know, the topic of today's conversation is loneliness, an important topic for our Jamaat, especially in the current climate, yet one we don't always discuss openly. So to start, we have a question we would like your thoughts on, which I'll bring up on the screen now. So our question is whether you feel connected with others. And if you have any other thoughts on this question, you can add these to the chat now. So to start our conversation today, I would like to introduce our two guests. First, we have Taslim Tharani, an organisational and coaching psychologist. And we have Rahila Muhibi, who's a humanitarian worker and case management worker at Focus. So now we'll close the slides so we can all see each other. And maybe Taslim, you could start our conversation today by telling us a bit about what your experiences are with loneliness.
Thank you very much, Iman, for the lovely introduction. It's so nice to see so many people here today. I am going to try my best to talk slowly. I know a lot of people find it sometimes difficult to understand my accent. But I'm going to start by sharing my thoughts about loneliness, really speaking from my own personal experience. And then as we move through, I will share a little bit more about the research into loneliness from a psychological perspective. So I've lived away from my parents since I was the age of 10, and I'm now 37 years old, so that's been 27 years. And there's a real loneliness for me that comes from being away from my family, from my cultural roots, and also just from my heritage. And I think growing up in a boarding school where I lost touch with my mother tongue, which is Kutchi, and where I had no choice but to integrate into a very Western culture, eating very British food, that process of transition, that sense of not ever really fitting in, really resulted in quite a deep sense of loneliness that I felt really from a very, very young age. And what was so interesting then and also now is that I can be surrounded by so many people and still feel incredibly, incredibly lonely. And I think this is a common experience for quite a lot of people. But there are also other more day-to-day experiences, or maybe not so many day-to-day experiences of loneliness that I'd like to just kind of share, just so that we get a sense of different types of loneliness. So a few years ago, for example, I lost somebody very close to me. And I was going through a lot of grief, and I was experiencing quite intense emotions around that. And that was a very lonely time. I think grief is quite a difficult emotion to express and to share. But I also feel lonely when I experience achievements, and I have things in my life that I really want to celebrate and things that I find really joyful, but where I might not necessarily have people that I can share that with. So there's something about loneliness that emerges when we experience different emotions, but we don't have a space to express these emotions or to share them with other people. Another area where I think that I feel lonely is when I feel I have to hide significant parts of who I am. Most people who know me know that I'm really extroverted, so I have a really big personality, and I often feel that I have to kind of rein that in, that I need to kind of dampen or calm myself down a lot of the time. And so often, and most of us will experience this, that, you know, when we're wearing masks, when we're not able to show up, you know, as as we are, that we can feel that real sense of loneliness. And that's often when, you know, I feel like I'm afraid I'm going to be judged, I'm afraid of being misunderstood, and so I'm not able to really express the things that I might want to express. And then there are other things, like I live alone in my flat, and I've got a leak at the moment. So I've got a leak in my bathroom, and I don't have anyone to help me, like, know what to do or who to call. And sometimes it's just the small day-to-day things of not having someone to necessarily share that with, that can give a sense of loneliness as well. And then the final thing is just simply not feeling connected at the moment due to COVID-19. So not being able to go to Jamat Khana, not being able to see my friends and family in person, that can also give rise to a sense of loneliness as well. But Rahila, I know that you have quite different experiences of loneliness based on your life experiences. So I'd be really interested to hear what loneliness is like for you.
Thank you, Taslim. That was very wonderful, the way you shared your personal experience. And as I was listening to you, I actually feel like there's a lot of similarities in our experience, especially in terms of the day-to-day aspect of things, and also not fitting well in terms of, you know, sometimes you don't want to really share your full identity. You don't feel safe in certain space where you cannot really share your full identity. So yes, and in those terms, we have really similar experience. But also, I think there are some differences as well. So I lived with my parents all my life, not all my life, but until like really my formative years, so late teenage years. And then at that time, even though I grew up in a very loving family and a big, large family, Afghans. I'm from Afghanistan originally, but I've moved and lived abroad quite multiple times in different times of my life. I have been displaced, and I also lived by choice to pursue education in other places. So I actually felt lonely, and I have my first experience of loneliness when I was a child in Afghanistan. Even though we have a very, very loving family, large family, and in Afghanistan we have, like, for instance, I have 8 siblings. But yet I still felt really lonely. And I think and that is because probably I grew up in a very patriarchal and conservative society, and I couldn't, from an ideological perspective, I couldn't really fit in the society, and I found myself very different in that sense. So I couldn't get along in terms of my perceptions and ideas with a lot of my peers, and also in the society I did not really agree. So in my ideas, I may have felt very lonely at very early age of my time. But then 2003 I moved to Canada, and there I moved alone. I was in a boarding school for high school. So that time, then a different kind of loneliness appeared in my life, and that was more cultural and more physical distance from my family, from my roots, basically the same way that you have experienced, I think, the migration. As you migrate from one place to another place, obviously you become distant from your culture. But I think for me, because I also moved away alone, so I evolved as a person. But then my siblings, my friends, people who have my main network that I had back in Afghanistan, and I had not yet developed a new network in a new country. So it felt a little bit very lonely, that transition as well, and that journey, and navigating through multiple identities. And I was trying to reassess my own identity, but at the same time explain my own identity to my surroundings and say, who am I, where I've come from. I had to articulate that to my new friends in Canada or in the States when I was studying. So that in itself also brought some sort of loneliness, and a loneliness from ideological perspective expanded to a more cultural disconnection and perspective. So Tasi, I'm very interested to know, I know your background, and I would like to really know from your perspective, how loneliness impacts our well-being and health.
Thank you, Rahila. I was really interested in a couple of things that you said, but particularly just your experience of going through so many different transitions, you know, from Afghanistan and then to Canada. And I know now we're friends and you're in the UK. And actually we can experience loneliness when we go through these different transitions. And so if we think even in terms of the current context, with COVID, we've kind of had this transition into, and now a lot of countries are having this transition forward into this kind of new way of being. And there can be a real sense of loneliness with that, but also the sense of anxiety as well. So we feel a sense of safety when we are connected to our social groups and social networks that we have an identification with. And so when we're moving to new places or moving in and out of different situations, where we're having to do things differently, or we're having to meet new and different people. And I know that you mentioned that you had to then explain or talk about your background and your culture to people who might not really have understood it. That can really impact our sense of belonging. And that kind of feeds this sense of loneliness. And it's really interesting because loneliness can have, we know from the research that loneliness can have longer term as well as short term negative impacts on our health and well-being. And this is because as human beings, we have evolved to need each other and depend on each other on our own communities for our sense of safety as well as survival. And so when we experience loneliness, what it does is it triggers what we call our fight or flight system. And this is that when we feel stressed, when we feel anxious, this survival mechanism in us gets triggered. And so research tells us that loneliness is actually the equivalent, for example, of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And we know that when we smoke cigarettes a day, 15 cigarettes a day, it reduces, or it can lead to like a premature death. And we know that loneliness increases the likelihood of death by 26%, which is quite shocking, I think. And so the health risks are similar to the health risks of obesity and immunity. When we feel lonely, we experience lower immunity, we experience higher blood pressure, we experience more anxiety, we experience maybe more depression. In older people, so when people get to their senior years, it's so important to have connection, because what we notice otherwise is that people are more likely to develop dementia or Alzheimer's as well. But I want to talk about the positives as well. So loneliness gives us an opportunity to find connection. It's a message or a signal to us that we want to be connected. We want to be connected to people who share similar identities, or where we have some kind of common ground. And again, we know from the psychology research, so for example, at Harvard Business School, they did a 75-year-long happiness study, where the people who were most happy were those who were actively involved in community life and who had strong social connections. And so this, as we know from what Hazra Imam tells us, that community is really, really important, and cultivating meaningful relationships within this community is really important. It promotes our sense of health and well-being. It promotes our sense of feeling engaged. We feel more motivated. We're better able to collaborate. We're much more resilient. And we are able to draw on the social resources of the people within our communities as well. Sorry, that was probably a lot of information. But Rahila, I know that you work for Focus Humanitarian Assistance. And in your work, you work with a lot of people who are transitioning to new places and new countries, and in quite difficult circumstances as well. And so I'm also really curious to hear from your professional expertise and perspective, what are the causes of loneliness that you see, or what are the kinds of things that you observe in the work that you do?
Yes, that was very interesting what you shared from the psychological perspective. From the migration or displacement perspective, what you earlier said in terms of not feeling at home, and we really have actually a concept for that. In your experience, probably not feeling home means from a very more philosophical perspective, I guess. But there is a term for it in Afghanistan, or for instance in Arab world as well. We have ghurba, or in Farsi we call it ghurbat. It is a sense of yearning for belonging or homesickness. So we have a term for that actually in Afghanistan, and it is really basically a grief. It is a period of grief when you are distancing from your roots and coming to another culture, whether by choice or by force. People are forcibly displaced as well. And I think as a Smiley, we're all a community with migration background. So we have all come from somewhere, or our parents may have come from somewhere. From what we have experienced or seen is that particularly elderly people in the migrant group, they experience loneliness, because as their newer generation, they're experiencing a very different kind of loneliness, because they are more close to their culture back home, from wherever they may have come from, because they were brought and raised there. So they're conditioned to socialize in that sort of culture or context. And also, I think there's another group of people who might feel also a different kind of loneliness, is the first generation migrants. So these are the people who are connected to their home, but yet also connected with their host country as well. So they are going through a transition or navigating through different multiple identities. So their journey could also feel very lonely. I think we may have also experienced that, as we have shared earlier, and also maybe some of the participants may have experienced that. So it'd be very interesting to hear their experience as well in the breakout room when we go there. But some of the causes, some of the more tangible causes that we can see are loss of family, friends, lack of social networks, for instance, language barriers, a big deal, and lack of access to services and resources, lack of status. So they may have been doctor, or they may have been a village leader or MP back in their countries, but now they cannot be that in the new country that they are residing. And loss of identity, I think that's a very big area where we will continuously feel lonely and struggle with that. And loss of job or career, some people have to really start from scratch. And cultural differences, this is another big area where people are struggling to understand each other. As Imam also says, there's a culture of like clash of ignorance. So sometimes those cultural differences, or the clash of ignorance in terms of culture, is also bringing lots of lack of miscommunication, and also discrimination and stigma associated to being a foreigner, and a structural impact of government policies. For instance, we have noticed that in Sweden or in Netherlands and Austria, asylum seekers are often placed in a very, very far away, and they're not able to connect to their own roots and culture, or some groups that they can feel familiar. So that can cause a lot of anxiety and stress. So those are some of the brief challenges that people from migration background face. Tassie, over to you.
It's so interesting, because even though I was born in the UK, there's so much of what you share that still, I feel like I've lived here my whole life for 37 years. But I myself still find that I'm navigating different identities, that I'm kind of, when I've got a lot of obviously non-Ismaili friends, and there's this wanting to kind of share with them some of my cultural background and cultural experience, and then vice versa as well. So it's really interesting just to reflect on this, and to think about how having to navigate these different identities impacts on our sense of belonging within all the different groups that we might participate in. So thank you for sharing that. It's really interesting to reflect on. It would be really great to hear from all of you who have joined us today in the chat, if you feel comfortable. Just some reflections that you've had on what we've said so far, maybe some of your own experiences of loneliness. Just in the chat, so keeping everybody muted for now would be great. And even though I guess we've started this session by focusing in on loneliness, the rest of the session we actually want to focus in on the opposite. So what are the kinds of things that we can do to move towards connection, to connect with each other? It's so exciting, we're all joining from lots of different countries today. So the rest of today is really about finding ways to strengthen our relationships with each other. And so in a moment, we're going to be moving into breakout rooms where you will all have an opportunity to talk about things in the groups that you end up being in. And you're more than welcome to talk about whatever it is that you would feel comfortable speaking about. But we've got a few questions that we thought might be helpful. And Salima, it would be great if you pop these up on the slides. And as Salima shares, and you can see the questions in the chat as well, but it would be great to just have them on the slide, just in case some people haven't found the chat, where the chat is. But in psychology, we talk about 3 different ways to strengthen relationships. And one of the ways is to strengthen relationships through developing trust. And one of the ways that we can develop trust between each other is to just open up to each other and share our experiences. So I've noticed with Rahila, I've actually known Rahila for a long time. I've known Rahila for a number of years, but it's only been actually over the last few months that we have started to share a lot more, and our relationship has really deepened because we've shared so much more openly about our experiences. So there's something about having the courage to share helps us to feel connected. The second thing, though, is about when we're listening to other people, how we interact with each other. And so the second thing is about what we call in psychology respectful engagement. And what this means is really about listening deeply to each other. So listening to understand without judgment. Maybe asking questions like the questions that we've got up on the slides that will enable us to touch more deeply into what people might be experiencing, and adopting a kind of sense of gentle curiosity, so that we show interest in the other person. We show that the other person that we're listening to, that we really care about them. And the third way is actually about empowering other people. So often, and this is going to be particularly true for parents who are here in the room with your children, that we feel a sense of protection for each other. We really don't want to be seeing our Ismaili brothers and sisters, or our friends, or our family, or our children suffering in any way, shape, or form. And so what we tend to do is we tend to give advice, or we tend to rescue, or we try to fix. And what we find in psychology, that those things actually can sometimes have the opposite effect when it comes to strengthening relationships. And what actually helps to strengthen relationships is to empower other people to find the resources within themselves, or even resources that are available to them from within the community, so the social resources, so that they're able to find their own solutions. So what we wanted to do is to break you all up into breakout rooms so that you could have an opportunity to practice some of these three things. So developing trust, which starts by just introducing ourselves and sharing a little bit about us. Having the courage to share something that might be a bit of a challenge and difficulty at the moment. And you might choose to share something similar to what Rahila and I have shared around loneliness. But then also connecting in terms of what's hopeful, what, connecting on the joyful things. What are we all hopeful for at the moment? Hazra Imam talks a lot about hope and the importance of hope in our lives. And I think particularly in the current context, it's so important to touch into that. And then finally, in the breakout rooms, just to share ideas about how can we strengthen the relationships that we already have, and what things are we already doing that helps us feel more connected. And what I think is so wonderful, I'm so pleased that you shared that, Samina, is that we rarely get the opportunity to come together globally like this. As a community, and so it's really wonderful, especially like you say, Samina, if you are living somewhere where there are fewer Ismailis and fewer opportunities to connect, then this is such a great way to connect with each other. Are there any other thoughts or reflections from your experiences in the breakout rooms? Please do feel free to share on the chat if you can find the chat, and or using your voices is fine too. Would anyone else like to share? And I'll give people a moment or two.
Sorry. It's Naseem.
Yes,
yes.
Hi.
Hi. I wanted to know what is the follow-up on a meeting of this kind?
It's a really great question. Tell me more about what you would like as a follow-up.
To me, I joined because I was interested to know what this forum would lead to.
Right.
But there must have been thoughts of, we'll do this meeting and then we'll follow it up with something else.
Absolutely. So I'm going to hand over to, I think, Shalina, either to Iman.
It's not to put you on the spot.
No, absolutely. So I'm going to hand over to the WAP team in the UK. Yeah. So either Iman or Shalina, if you would like to.
Sure. Yeah. So it's a great question, and we've run a couple of these. So we've had one on loneliness before, and we've had some on building relationships. And the idea really is to bring women together. We're one Jamaat, so meeting new people, making connections, and thinking about how we can support each other. So we will continue to run these on a monthly basis. Hopefully we have some of the same people coming back and we can all connect on an ongoing basis, and then try and tackle different topics that we as women find challenging. So our next one, for example, we're going to talk about anxiety, which is something a lot of people may feel, but we don't talk about very openly. So we'd like to keep running these on a regular basis, bringing in different guests, different perspectives, and different members of the Jamaat meet each other. But as Taslim said, if there's something you would like to see as a follow-up, we'd love to hear that. We're very open to feedback. It's quite a new forum that we're running.
Thank you, Iman. And thank you, Naseem, for sharing and asking the question. Are there any other thoughts and reflections? I don't know if everyone can see the chat, so I'm going to just read out the reflections that have come through on the chat. So Shalina shared, it was interesting to hear how people's expectations have changed in terms of meeting with people and being more easygoing. Hearing that there was also some feelings of anxiousness about coming out of lockdown, and that helped Shalina feel less alone. And then Anisa shared, she's extremely happy. This was a wonderful session, had a nice talk with her sister, Parin, had got to know about her and her family and the Jamaat, and she has to leave. So, well, thank you for joining us, Anisa. So any other thoughts and reflections, or we can move straight into the Q&A?
So Taslim, if I can say some words, maybe. I
Oh,
didn't.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so thank you very much for this opportunity. And sometimes, like in many moments during like my life here in Europe, I say Shukr Mawla that I'm related to this community, because we share same feeling with different languages, with different like many differences, but we live moments together. So this is very good. And one of the challenges was during this lockdown that we were unable to have this kind of communication. So especially for many of our sisters and their family that they came from other countries, they are installed recently, they like newly arrived in this country, they have many challenges. So coming to Jamaat Khana was a way to relax. So, and we still have many difficulties. So in the language and paper, so we cannot go back to our country, to our traditions, to our language, to our family. So we already have many challenges. We feel like alone, far of parents, far of family. So being part of this community, that for me, and of what I saw from the chat or from the discussion, that gave us like a vitamin to continue. Yeah, so inshallah, Jamaat Khana will be open, and hopefully with this webinar, for some, we think very strongly with the families that they are isolated, because some areas they don't have Jamaat Khana. So having this kind of webinar, TV, Smiley TV, Shukr Mawla of this decision that is taken, so we can watch also the Smiley TV, we can share some memories of Darbar in my country, in other countries. So yeah, I think this kind of connection that can like help to give more motivation, I think. Yeah, and because we have a lot of pressure on us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Iman, for sharing that. And it's so joyful to hear your gratitude there as well. And I'm hearing that, I think, in quite a few people who are sharing, that it feels very, although many times I think we can feel disconnected from each other, and we can sometimes feel like, I know that even within the Ismaili community that I sometimes don't feel that sense of belonging, but just knowing that we are here and we have each other, and the institutions are doing so much and have done so much for us during the last few months particularly, I feel that gratitude as well. Thank you. Any other thoughts or reflections?
Okay, so I wanted to share, Taslim, for a few minutes.
Sure.
What I thought about this lockdown. Actually, I was coming back from India, where I had to go for my treatment, whatever. And when I came down here, of course, I enter in this kind of lockdown, and you know what it's reserved. So what the first thing I thought that, of course, I was put in a committee where we were supposed to phone some old ladies, you know, 7 to 8 ladies, like in everyday basis and so on. So what I found about these old ladies, that they were really lonely, because the topic of tonight, I think it was about loneliness, was it? So, hello?
Yes.
I don't,
yes, we can hear you, yes.
Okay. So anyway, so I thought that what I find about these people, especially these elderly people, that they were really alone, and they, no matter how much, how many times you call them, it was like not satisfying, you know. So when the time was permitting me, I went to see them, like visit them, and I stayed with them for a few hours and everything. So the thing is, the first how you say barrier, they find that they cannot manipulate this technology, you know, like when Iman talk about Ismaili TV, etc. So they would say, but this is great, because now we have time, we have possibility, but we don't know how to go through, right? So I tried to show to one to the other lady, and then I phoned them back to see. But it seems that it's so difficult for them, right? This is one thing. And the loneliness is something that they cannot explain. It's like the moment we are with them, they feel okay, and they can smile. They will kind of, you know, share these good moments. And right after you go, after a few hours, if you call them and so on, they just can't go through, you know. It seems that there's nobody for them. They cannot attract anything. They have less interest in many. I mean, there's no interest, no objective to go through. Of course, there's no Jamat Kala. They call each other, you know, between them. But again, what to talk about, because there's no any, as I say, objective, nothing to see forward, further, and so on. So anyway, this is the things I wanted to share, and I thought that if these people feel this way, I mean, I feel myself, to be frank, I feel when I get up in the mornings, if I have nothing to look forward, you know, if there are not challenging things, I feel very lonely. I feel a lot of anxiety. So anyway, so these are the things that really bothers me, and also I like, you know, I'm sympathetic with the others one.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Shamim. I think that you've shared something that's so crucial, actually, that I do know that older members of our Jamaat, particularly who maybe don't have access to technology in the same way, feel incredibly lonely. And I thought it was really interesting that you talked about this this connection between loneliness and anxiety, and it's very real. And this is because when human beings evolved, we knew that we were safe when we have other people around us. So the way that families and tribes and villages were safe were because that they knew that they were together. So they had people who would like hunt for food, other people who would protect them from, I don't know, lions or snakes or whatever it was. But there was protection from being together and being with each other. And so when we feel lonely, what happens is that we do feel more anxious, and we see this a lot, Shamim, you'll know, from children, right? So when you have toddlers, or even like 1-year-olds, and their primary carer, their mother or their father or somebody that they know, goes out of the room and they no longer can see them, we call this separation anxiety. So then there's this fear and this anxiety that comes up because there's a sense of a lack of safety when we're alone. And so as much as we're able to, and obviously in the current times, it's very difficult, the reaching out to others, whether it's a phone call, whether it's now in different countries, the regulations are different. But in the UK, I know, for example, my Nanima, I'm now able to see her in the garden, but 2 feet away, and we're wearing our masks. I think it's so important. And I understand the feelings of anxiety that come from being alone. And Rahila and I think will now move into some strategies and some tips about how we can actually manage this or cope with this. So I will start first, and then I will hand over to Rahila. But the first thing is just to acknowledge how we're feeling. So I think so often we get the sense of I feel lonely, or we get the sense of anxiety, and we don't really know what to do with those emotions. And there's something in learning to just, if we just are able to name the emotion, so if we can find the vocabulary to name the emotion, that actually helps us to settle. And actually one of the things that that results in us feeling more and more anxious is because we're trying to push away the anxiety, or we're trying not to feel it. So the first thing that I would say is really acknowledge the emotions, and then ask yourself this question. I asked myself this question a number of times throughout the day. I just say, what is the next most kind step I can take towards myself? Now that might be reaching out to a friend. It might be, if the regulations allow, taking myself for a walk. It might be saying myself up. It might be lying under a tree if I'm allowed to do that. It might be going for a nap. It might be doing some yoga. The response to that question will always be different. But I find that when I ask myself that question, it enables me to find a way to respond to those emotions that show up. Loneliness is essentially a signal. It's a signal that, that our social and emotional needs are not being met. And so one of the things that we would want to do is try to identify what those needs are that we have, and then take steps to have those needs met. Now naturally, in the current COVID situation, a lot of us have much more limited resources, and so we may not be able to have all of our needs met. But the aim would be that we would try and have some of those needs met. And then the other thing is, which Shamim, you've spoken to beautifully, and there was a lady called Rosina who spoke about this beautifully as well. This notion of reaching out to other people as well. So as best as we can, within our capacities, find ways to reach out to other people, find ways to ask people how they're doing, find ways to offer our seva in different ways. The fact that everybody has joined this call is a step in connecting. So hopefully these are just a few things that might be helpful. And I'm going to just hand it over to Rahila, who will share a little bit more about your strategies for working through some of your experiences of loneliness as well.
Thank you, Taslim. It was really nice actually in the breakout room as well, that we had a newborn baby in our group. It was very cute. And also we have some challenges in terms of, a lot of people highlighted Jamaat Khana in our group, the lack of Jamaat Khana right now, and also not being connected to their professional lives as well because of the lockdown or because of a new motherhood. And in terms of the tips, I have found it very useful to continuously assess the quality of my social relationships, and to see whether I'm making meaningful connection, or am I just under pressure to make those connections with them? Am I coming out under any sort of social media? And sometimes we also come under pressure of the new trends, whether this is now trendy for me to be like this, or is it because I'm actually really connecting with the people I'm surrounded. And then also another thing is that all of us have multiple identities, and then in each of our different identities we find some sort of comfort. And I found it very useful to prioritize which part of my identity is more is the priority, that it gives me a lot more joy when I'm connecting with people, with certain, when I'm going and making connection in relation that part of my identity. It sounds a bit complex, but I can give you an example. For instance, as a young single Afghan, I found it very difficult at the time sometimes to connect from my cultural perspective with the diaspora community, because I couldn't really find a meaningful way to connect. But then I went and relied more on my professional network. So I was more connecting with people who were working in similar situation or had similar ideas to me in terms of purpose-wise. They were fighting for human rights, or they were working in the same refugee similar group, or also in my faith community. Then I found, for instance, Taslim and I are now friends. We have so many. So I found different pockets of networks slowly. First I started with my professional settings, but then it eventually, that sort of idea replicated itself, and it went to my faith community. So with the Smiley now I have a group of Ismaili friends. And then eventually that went to my Afghan community, because then I said, okay, maybe I cannot relate to my Afghan community on a personal level or a more value like from a feminist perspective, but then maybe I can connect on a more activism perspective. So then I started to build that friendship, a network of friendship with Afghan friends who were fighting for the same cause, like they were anti-war, or they had similar identity issues in terms of going through different identities and navigating their places in different contexts and talking about their culture. So those things are very, very useful for me. I think talking of multiple identities, I found very nice quote when I was attending one of the sessions. So Anar Ali is an author, a Ismaili author based in Canada. So if we can show that slide, it'd be nice to reflect on what she had said. She has said that I'm a woman cracked by multiple migration, uprooted to so many times. She can connect nothing with nothing. So this is actually Mina Alexander saying that a poet who is of Sudan and American, based in America. And then, but I did not want to live in the cracks. It was exhausting. I wanted to live in a place that held all my multiplicities. So for me, initially, I found my multiplicities, multiple part of identity in different pockets. But now I'm trying to merge that identity in one holistic way. So then I can feel comfortable in being one person, but at the same time with multiple identities, and I can be in harmony in all of that. And once I think we find that harmony, then we feel at peace, and we feel we find more meaningful meaning in our social relationships. That's it.
Thank you again, Rahila. I'm always so moved and inspired when you speak and when you share your experiences with such clarity and such nuance and such openness. So thank you so much, Rahila, for sharing all of that. So we've got about 10 minutes left of the session. I'm going to hand over to Iman, who's going to move us through to the end of the session and evaluation. But do stay on the call, because I'm going to invite us at the very end, the last 5 minutes of the session, to do a bit of a what we call a loving kindness meditation, which is an opportunity for us to connect from our kind of heart space or soul space with each other. So Iman, I'm going to hand over to you, and then I'll close off with that meditation practice.
Thank you, Taslim, and thank you, Rahila. Thank you both of you for leading the conversation today. So as we're wrapping up the session, we just wanted to reiterate to you that we're here to support you. So on the screen next, you'll see some signposts to resources in the UK and France jurisdictions. Even if you're not in these jurisdictions, of course, please reach out to us at any time. So we've got the Aga Khan Health Board, the Social Welfare Board, and then the Women's Activities Portfolio. And in the UK, we have the Coronavirus Support Team. And then in France, we've also got the National Council numbers there. So I will now also just share on screen some short evaluation questions. These are hugely valuable to us to make sure we're providing the kind of forums and events that you like, and also for you to make sure that these are useful for you. They're completely anonymous, and if you'd like to provide any additional comments, you could add these on the chat. You could send it to any of us directly as well if you prefer not to share them widely. But you should see those on your screen now. If you could please fill those in, that would be great. Thank you.
Do you think we're able to do a balance of our multi-identities?
Yes, I'm certainly. I'm going to have a talk, I think, in July, and I think Taslim, we have had this conversation multiple times as well, that initially I was not really, I was not really hopeful that we can find balance in our multiple identity. That was many years ago. But I think as I started to develop that diverse network related to my multiple identities, it was not diverse network, random one, but related to my meaning, my purpose in life, and also my identity, I was able to then find that balance. Then I was able, and by being honest as well, when I was in the African community, I always told them, look, I do not subscribe to this kind, to your views of women, but I'm happy to collaborate with you on this. And it was, for me, then I didn't shut it down completely to say, look, I do not subscribe to your views of women, that's why I will completely stop talking to you. I said, no, I do not subscribe to this, but I would like to help, but in a very friendly tone. So then that way I'm welcoming, I'm making my point, saying that I'm different than you, but I'm also able to connect with you on our common issues. So I absolutely think it's possible to find balance in our identity. And also one thing that gave me hope was that there's always, change is always possible. And sometimes we think from a perspective of saying, oh my God, this is not going to change, everything's going to remain the same. I've realized over time that actually change is the biggest hope that we can have in this world. And it sometimes things changes in a way that we cannot even expect ourselves. And it changes, and it just gives a lot of hope that, okay, now last many years ago, I didn't think that some people would think of, let's say, LGBT community, would have rights for it. Now people are speaking up about it. And there's so many, so yeah, I think I would say change, and also staying open-minded to change. And also being honest to our whenever we interact with other people, saying that, look, I would like to be part of you, but this is my conditions, or this is how I'm working, this is how my brain works, or my values work. Yes, definitely, it's a very difficult space to be in. Sometimes you will get lonely to be in that multiple identity, try to navigate, especially if we haven't brought them together at once and we are dealing with it separately, it becomes a little bit challenging. But I think once we bring it together and we become comfortable in that multiplicities, then it is just so beautiful, because you're not one person, actually 5 person in one person, you know what I mean? I hope it's not freaky, Taslim.
No, thank you, Rahila. I always love our conversations, and I'm so glad everybody on this call is having the opportunity to share some of the conversations that you and I have quite regularly. You just articulate it so beautifully, and I think with so much hope. So thank you, Iman, for asking the question, and thank you, Rahila, for your very hopeful and positive and beautiful response. So we're going to draw the session to the close, and I'm going to invite you all to share with me in a practice. And you can close your eyes, or you can keep your eyes open. And I like to just place my hand on my chest, just because that's over the heart. That's our heart space. Yeah, so feel free to keep your eyes open or closed as we do this practice together. So as we come to the end of today's session, let's find a way to connect to the humanity within each and every one of us, to remember that we are all created from a single soul, bringing into our hearts all the people who are on this call right now, from all over the world. We've had people from Egypt, from Saudi, from France, from Belgium, from Amsterdam, from the UK, and lots of other different places in the world. And knowing that each and every single one of us has known suffering. Each one of us experiences moments of joy, achievement, excitement. We have all also known loss, times of hardship. We have all valued being listened to deeply and empathically. We all value being understood. We all have a need to be seen, to be heard, for our experiences to be validated. We all have memories that are private, some which might feel a little shameful or might be a bit embarrassing. We all have hope. We all have dreams. We all have desires. Each one of us knows what it is like to lie awake in the early hours of the morning and not being able to fall back to sleep. Knowing that everybody here has at least perhaps once in their lifetimes experienced the depths of loneliness, but also that each one of us has experienced the ease of burdens with a problem shared. Each one of us has known suffering, loss, sickness, aging. We have all also known happiness, laughter, good health, radiance, and vitality. So keeping each one of us who's here on this call in our minds and hearts, and all those who are parts of our communities and the societies that we live in, may our difficulties be eased. May we be safe from all difficulties and illnesses. May our wishes, hopes, dreams be fulfilled. May we find courage. May we find light in our hearts and peace in our minds. May there be unity in our families, with our communities. May we celebrate and notice collaboration. And may we send our good wishes to all the people who are keeping things going for us, the doctors, the nurses, the carers, the fruit pickers, the lorry drivers who bring the groceries to the stores, the people who help keep our streets clean, the inventors of Zoom who made this call possible, our smiling institutions, and all the volunteers. May we send our good wishes to all of humanity. May we stay healthy and safe, and may there be peace. Amen.
And Yali Madad.